It doesn't start with anxiety, it starts with reflection. A conversation ends, the room goes quiet, and instead of moving on, the mind goes back to the words, back to the pauses, back to the tone. This is the psychology of people who overthink after every interaction. For these people, interactions don't simply end, they echo. A single sentence can replay for hours. A facial expression can be examined from every angle. A moment of silence can feel louder than words, not because something went wrong, but because the mind is searching for certainty. Overthinking is often misunderstood as insecurity, but for many people, it's not about low confidence, it's about high awareness. They notice details others miss. They pick up on shifts in energy. They sense emotional undercurrents beneath casual exchanges. Their mind doesn't skim the surface, it dives. After an interaction, the body may relax, but the mind stays active. It asks quiet questions. Did I say too much? Did I sound rude? Did they mean something by that? Should I have responded differently? These questions don't arrive dramatically. They slip in gently, and once they arrive, they stay. People who overthink after interactions often care deeply about how they affect others. They don't want to harm. They don't want to offend. They don't want to be misunderstood. So the mind reviews the moment, hoping to find reassurance. But reassurance rarely comes from overthinking, because the mind is not looking for truth. It's looking for control. Psychologically, this pattern often develops early. In environments where emotional safety was unpredictable, the brain learned to analyze interactions carefully, not to judge them, but to survive them. When reactions mattered, when moods shifted suddenly, when words had consequences, the mind adapted. It learned to replay conversations, to scan for hidden meaning, to anticipate reactions before they happened. Over time, this became automatic. The brain associated analysis with safety. If I understand everything that happened, nothing bad will surprise me. But human interaction is not a puzzle that can be solved perfectly. People are inconsistent. Emotions are layered. Meaning is not always clear. And this is where overthinking begins to hurt. After an interaction, instead of resting, the mind stays alert. It dissects tone, rewrites responses, imagines alternate versions of the conversation, not because the interaction was bad, but because the mind doesn't know how to let uncertainty exist. People who overthink often struggle with ambiguity, not because they're rigid, but because ambiguity once felt dangerous. A delayed reply feels heavy. A short response feels loaded. A neutral expression feels suspicious. The mind fills in the gaps, and usually it fills them with self-blame. Maybe I was annoying. Maybe I said the wrong thing. Maybe they don't like me anymore. Even without evidence, this doesn't come from ego. It comes from responsibility taken too far. Many people who overthink after interactions learned early to manage relationships carefully. They became emotionally attuned. They learned to read rooms. They learned to adjust themselves to keep things smooth. They were praised for being considerate, for being thoughtful, for being emotionally intelligent. But no one taught them when to stop thinking. So after interactions, the mind keeps working, trying to improve, trying to correct, trying to prevent future discomfort. Overthinking can feel productive. It feels like preparation. But preparation without boundaries becomes exhaustion. People who overthink often replay not just what they said, but what they should have said. They imagine better responses, stronger boundaries, wittier remarks, and then they judge themselves for not having said them in time. This creates a quiet inner pressure, a belief that you must always respond perfectly, that every interaction is a test, that mistakes mean rejection. But real connection does not require perfection. It requires presence, and overthinking pulls you away from presence. There is also a deep sensitivity here. People who overthink tend to feel deeply. They care about impact. They care about harmony. They care about being understood. This sensitivity is not a flaw. It's a strength that lacks protection. Without boundaries, sensitivity turns inward. It becomes rumination. After interactions, instead of allowing emotions to pass, they get analyzed. Instead of letting conversations end, they get reopened. The mind asks, what if? What if I came across wrong? What if they misunderstood me? What if I ruined something? And because the mind can't access the other person's thoughts, it creates its own narrative, often a harsh one. This can lead to emotional fatigue, because every interaction now carries a second shift. The first is the conversation. The second is the replay. Over time, this can make socializing feel heavy, not because people are draining, but because the aftermath is. Some people begin to avoid interactions altogether, not because they dislike connection, but because the mental cost afterward feels overwhelming. Others push through. They socialize, then lie awake replaying moments. They smile in public, then critique themselves in private, and no one sees the effort it takes. People who overthink often feel embarrassed by it. They tell themselves they should just let it go. But letting go is not a switch. It's a skill. The nervous system doesn't release what it still perceives as unresolved. So the first step is understanding this. Overthinking is not your mind betraying you. It's your mind trying to protect you using old strategies that once helped, but may no longer be necessary. Healing does not mean stopping thoughts. It means changing your relationship with them. Instead of asking, did I mess up? You ask, do I actually have evidence that something went wrong? Instead of replaying tone, you notice your body. Are you tense? Are you bracing? Often, overthinking is stored stress looking for a reason. Learning to ground after interactions matters. A pause, a breath, a moment of physical presence. This signals safety to the nervous system. It tells the brain the interaction is over, that it doesn't need to stay alert. Another important shift is this. Not every interaction needs analysis. Some conversations are just moments, not lessons, not evaluations, not reflections of your worth. You are allowed to be imperfect in real time. You are allowed to say things that aren't perfectly phrased. You are allowed to be human. People who overthink often hold themselves to standards they don't apply to others. They forgive others easily. They understand others' mistakes. But themselves, they analyze. This imbalance creates inner tension. So part of healing is extending the same grace inward. Another truth, you are not responsible for how every interaction lands. Communication is shared. Meaning is co-created. You are only responsible for your intention, not every interpretation. When overthinkers internalize this, something softens. The mind loosens its grip. There will still be thoughts, but they won't dominate. And slowly, interactions stop echoing as loudly. The mind learns it doesn't need to replay everything to stay safe. The truth is this: people who overthink after every interaction are not broken. They are deeply aware, deeply caring, and deeply human. Their minds learn to protect connection. Now, they are learning to protect themselves too. If this feels familiar, you're not imagining it. Your reactions make sense. Your thought patterns have history, and you are allowed to evolve beyond them. You don't need to analyze every word to be worthy of connection. You don't need to replay every moment to be safe. You don't need to earn peace through mental effort. Sometimes, the most healing thing you can do after an interaction is let it end, not because it didn't matter, but because you do, and your mind deserves rest. And rest does not come from certainty. It comes from trust. Trust that not every silence is a judgment. Trust that not every pause is a rejection. Trust that not every interaction needs to be revisited to be valid. People who overthink often believe peace comes after understanding everything, but peace actually comes when you allow some things to remain unfinished, unanswered, unexplained, unreviewed. And that can feel uncomfortable at first, because your mind was trained to stay alert. to stay ready, to stay one step ahead of potential discomfort. So when you try to let go, the nervous system resists. It says, what if we miss something? What if this matters later? What if letting go is a mistake? But letting go is not forgetting. It's trusting that you can handle whatever comes next, without rehearsing it 100 times. Overthinking convinces you that constant awareness is protection, but constant awareness without rest becomes a form of self-surveillance. You start monitoring yourself instead of living, and slowly, you forget what it feels like to just be in a moment, without narrating it afterward. This is why learning to end interactions internally is so important, not by forcing thoughts away, but by gently closing the mental loop, by telling yourself, that moment is over, I am here now, again, and again, and again, until the body begins to believe it. Another quiet truth is this: most people are far more focused on themselves than we imagine. They replay their own words, their own tone, their own moments of uncertainty. The thing you're analyzing late at night may not even be remembered by the other person, not because you didn't matter, but because everyone is carrying their own inner world. Realizing this doesn't make you careless. It makes you free. Free from the belief that every interaction defines you. Free from the pressure to perform emotionally. Free from the idea that connection must be perfected to be real. And when that freedom settles in, something shifts. You begin to stay present longer. You begin to recover faster. You begin to trust that small imperfections don't erase closeness. Overthinking doesn't disappear overnight, but it softens. It loosens its grip. Moments stop echoing as loudly. Silence stops feeling so threatening. And your mind learns that it doesn't have to stay on guard all the time. This is not about becoming careless with your words. It's about becoming kinder with your mind, because awareness without compassion becomes a burden. And you were never meant to carry your thoughts like evidence against yourself. You were meant to experience life, not audit it. So if you find yourself replaying a conversation tonight, pause, notice your breath, notice where you are, and remind yourself, you showed up, you were human, and that is enough. The interaction has ended. You don't need to follow it home.